The Unsolved Disappearance of the Sodder Children. Stay with me, because this one doesn't let go. It has been examined by journalists, private investigators, federal agents, and a mother who spent the rest of her life, 30 years of it, sitting with an enlarged photograph of her missing children, mounted on a billboard in her front yard, facing the road, asking anyone who passed whether they had seen them. She never took it down. That detail alone should tell you something about the nature of what happened in Fayetteville, West Virginia, on Christmas Eve, 1945. Part 1. The Family. George Sodder was an Italian immigrant who had built, through decades of hard work in the American coalfields, a life substantial enough to house a wife and 9 children in a large 2-story home outside Fayetteville, a small town in the hills of central West Virginia. He ran a trucking and hauling business. He was known in the community as a practical, straightforward man, not given to drama, not given to complaint. His wife, Jennie, was by every account the kind of woman around whom a large family coheres, the fixed point that everything orbits. On the night of December 24th, 1945, the Sodder home was full but not complete. Their eldest son, Joe, was away, serving in the United States Army, the only one of the 10 Sodder children not under that roof on Christmas Eve. George and Jennie were downstairs with 4 of their children when the evening wound down. 5 of their other children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, ranging in age from 5 to 14, were awake past their usual bedtime, still excited from Christmas Eve, and had been allowed to stay up a little longer. George fell asleep first. Jennie followed. At approximately 1 a.m, she was woken by the telephone. A woman's voice on the line asked for someone who did not live there. Wrong number. Jennie hung up and noticed, as she did, that the lights upstairs were still on. She called to the children to go to bed and went back to sleep. It was the last time she spoke to the 5 of them. Part 2. The Fire. At approximately midnight, though the exact time was disputed in subsequent investigations, a fire broke out in the Sodder home. George woke to smoke and heat and the specific panic of a parent whose house is burning around their sleeping children. He and Jennie woke the 4 children in the rooms near them and got them out. They called for the other 5. No answer. George attempted to re-enter the house 3 times. Each time, the heat drove him back. He tried to reach a ladder kept on the side of the house. It was gone. He tried to move one of his trucks beneath an upper window to climb up. Both trucks, which had been running the previous evening, would not start. He tried to find a telephone to call the fire department. The line was dead. By the time neighbors arrived and fire trucks were summoned, arriving, accounts suggest, after an inexplicable delay of several hours despite the fire station being only 2 miles away, the house was gone, burned to the foundation in approximately 45 minutes. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, Betty, 5 children, gone. When investigators searched the ash and debris for remains, they found almost nothing. A vertebra, later disputed, some unidentified material, no bones, no teeth, no physical evidence consistent with 5 human bodies having been present in the structure when it burned. The fire chief initially ruled the deaths accidental. Then, under the Sodders' pressure, he reversed his determination and said the cause was undetermined. The bodies were never found, because there were no bodies. Part 3. The Questions. What George and Jennie Sodder documented in the weeks and months after the fire was a series of details that, taken individually, might each be explained. Taken together, they constructed a picture that neither the local authorities nor the family could satisfactorily account for. The latter. It had been moved from where George always kept it to a location some distance from the house. Someone had moved it before the fire. The trucks, both had been running without issue the day before. In the investigation afterward, a mechanic examining them found that the ignition wiring had been cut on both vehicles. The telephone line. It had not failed due to the fire. Telephone lines run underground in that area. Someone had cut it. A telephone company employee found it severed at a point away from the structure, cut cleanly rather than burned. The delay. The Fayetteville Fire Department, 2 miles away, took several hours to respond. The explanation offered was inadequate and was never formally resolved. The fire itself. A house of that size, burning that quickly, 45 minutes to complete destruction, struck fire investigators consulted by the family in subsequent years as unusual, consistent with the presence of an accelerant rather than an accidental ignition. And the bones. 5 children, if consumed by fire in that structure, should have left behind skeletal remains. The human skeleton does not simply vanish in a house fire. Bones survive. Teeth survive. The near total absence of remains was not, investigators the Sodders later consulted agreed, consistent with accidental fire death. Someone had moved the ladder. Someone had cut the wires. Someone had cut the telephone line. The 5 children were gone. Part 4. The investigation that wasn't. The official investigation into the Sodder fire was, by any reasonable standard of assessment, inadequate. The debris was cleared and the site buried before a thorough forensic examination could be completed, a decision made with a speed that George Sodder found suspicious and was never able to fully explain. The fire chief signed a death certificate for all 5 children despite the absence of remains sufficient to confirm their deaths. The local authorities, when pressed by the family, offered responses that varied between unhelpful and contradictory. The Sodders did not accept the official conclusion. They hired private investigators. They wrote to the FBI. They wrote to their congressional representatives. George, who had been a vocal critic of Mussolini in the years before the war, at a time when Italian-American community politics in West Virginia were complex and sometimes dangerous, had been approached by a man in the months before the fire who had made, according to George's account, a thinly veiled threat. He had dismissed it at the time. He did not dismiss it afterward. An insurance investigator named C.C. Tinsley, hired by the family in the late 1940s, concluded after extensive review that the 5 children had not died in the fire. He believed they had been removed from the house before or during it by persons unknown, while the fire was used to conceal the removal. He could not identify who had taken them or where they had been taken. The FBI reviewed the case and declined to pursue it as a federal matter. The children were officially dead. Part 5. The letter. The Sodder children did not entirely disappear from the world after 1945. In 1967, 22 years after the fire, Jennie Sodder received a photograph in the mail. It was of a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, dark-haired, with features that Jennie and several of her surviving children identified as resembling Louis Sodder as he might have looked had he grown up. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting that has never been identified, were the words, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. You little boys, A90132. The photograph had been postmarked from somewhere in Kentucky. The return address was false. The code on the back, if it was a code, was never deciphered. Jennie Sodder took the photograph to investigators. Nothing conclusive was ever determined. The young man in the photograph was never identified. Whether he was Louis Sodder, a fraud exploiting a grieving mother, or something else entirely, has never been established. It was the only communication that ever came. George Sodder died in 1968. Jennie died in 1989. The billboard with the children's photographs stood in the front yard until Jennie's death, facing the road, watching every car that passed. A surviving sibling, Sylvia, has continued to pursue the case into her own old age. She has never accepted the official determination. She has stated, repeatedly and without equivocation, that she believes her siblings were taken and did not die in the fire. She has no definitive proof. She also has no remains. Part 6. The Unanswered. What happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty Sodder on Christmas Eve, 1945, in a small town in the hills of West Virginia, is one of the most genuinely unresolved disappearance cases in American history. The official record says they died in a house fire. The official record cannot produce their bones. It cannot explain the cut wires, the moved ladder, the disabled trucks, the delayed fire department, or the photograph that arrived in the mail 22 years later with a name written on the back in someone else's handwriting. A mother spent 30 years watching the road from behind a billboard photograph of 5 children who may have grown up somewhere without her. And the question that Jennie Sodder lived with for the rest of her life, the question that was never answered while she was alive to receive the answer, is the same question the case leaves with anyone who examines it carefully enough. If they died in the fire, where are the bones? And if they didn't, where did 5 children go on Christmas Eve? And who decided that their mother would never be allowed to know? Sleep well, my friend.